to another episode of Common Sense with Dr. Ben Carson. I'm your host, Ben Carson. You know, Jonathan Haidt's 2024 book, The Anxious Generation, How the Great Rewiring of Childhood is Causing an Epidemic of Mental Illness, has been influential in shaping public discourse about smartphones and social media in children's mental health. Some of the criticisms have been around causality, which has sparked research on correlation versus causation. Now, researchers at the University of California in San Francisco have found a link between the use of social media by preteens and future depression. Watch this short clip from PBS.
A new study has found a link between preteens' use of social media and future depression. The study was conducted by researchers at the University of California, San Francisco, and published this week in the American Medical Journals Association journal, JAMA. The study said more time spent on social media may contribute to increased depressive symptoms over time. Ali Rogan spoke with the lead researcher, Dr. Jason Nagata.
We followed 12,000 preteens over 3 years, and we actually found big rises in social media use. So during that period, social media on average increased from 7 minutes a day to over 70 minutes a day, so a tenfold increase. And in our analysis, we actually found that rises in social media from year to year among these 9, then 10, then 11-year-olds were actually associated with future depressive symptoms in the following year. So I think there's a big kind of unknown in the field right now. Chicken or the egg, does social media precede depression, or is it maybe just a reflection of underlying symptoms? And I think that our study does show a little bit more stronger evidence that social media is a risk factor for future depression in these kids.
What we do know is that children are spending more and more time online. Get this, children 8 to 12 in the United States spend 4 to 6 hours a day watching or using screens, and teens spend up to 9 hours, a whole workday plus overtime. And even the CDC has recognized social media as a contributor to the youth mental health crisis. About 1 in 4 teenagers with 4 hours or more of daily access to screen time have experienced anxiety or depression in the past 2 weeks, according to the CDC. As parents, it makes sense to question how much social media our children are consuming. Parents everywhere wrestle with how to balance screen time with healthy development. And now that school is out for the summer, parents are wondering how to help our kids rediscover curiosity, adventure, and the joy of being outdoors. Boy, I remember I enjoyed that so much when I was a kid. I still love being outdoors. That's why I'm encouraging everyone to watch today's guest and to read her magazine, which we will talk about, which encourages children to use common sense, love constructive thinking, get outside, be curious, and discover things. Welcome, Bronwyn Weaver, founder and editor-in-chief of Boulder Magazine. I was thrilled to hear about the work that's being done there, and I'm excited to talk about the collaboration of Boulder Magazine with our Little Patriots program. It's so wonderful to have you with our audience today, and we're anxiously awaiting what you have to say. You seem to have a genuine curiosity and excitement for the natural world. Did your own childhood shape this? How did your childhood shape your interest in nature?
Hello, Dr. Carson. Thank you for having me on the Common Sense podcast. It is, it's a perfect complement to what we're trying to do with Boulder Magazine. We want kids to be bold about what they know and bold about our future. And I'm speaking to you from the farm that I grew up on. I was so blessed to have a childhood that was mostly outdoors. And when I wasn't outdoors, I was reading. It was so important to my parents. We were surrounded by books, all kinds of books. And when we started the magazine, part of what we wanted to create was the scene from my childhood where I was sitting on the carpet in front of the bookcase with a world book on my lap. And when I was looking up one thing, I discovered 5 or 6 other things that I would never have looked up. And I think that your introduction about the digital age and the impact of technology on children and their learning, a lot of it is that when they look up something, they're looking up something so specific, and they never wander around with their investigation and their exploring. Looking up something in the World Book, you'd lose yourself finding, right?
No, I remember spending hours and hours. You were looking up one thing, and there were so many other interesting things that you learned about.
And so
Yes.
my own childhood, really, I'm right where I am because of all the things that have happened up until now, just like all of us, right? And my parents were city people that bought a farm when they were in their 50s and changed their life completely. And I was the old expression, the Johnny come lately in my family. I was the youngest of 4 daughters by far. And so my parents were 50 with a 6-year-old. And their experiment of learning gardening on a big scale. We had cows, we had bees, we had chickens. I grew up in the middle of this big experiment, and it was such a gift. It was always learning, always observing, not knowing what to expect next. And that childhood, that experience, it really formed the person that I am. I watched my parents become stewards of the land here on this little farm. And stewardship
Absolutely.
is something, again, that's part of what we hope to convey in Boulder Magazine. It's a magazine about being outdoors, about exploring nature, and also about the magnificence of all of the natural resources that are God-given, that we've got responsibility not only to know about where things come from, but to care about it so that we can be taking care of these resources in the best way and being stewards of the land. And people have
Absolutely.
lost that connection, just like what we talked about, looking things up. We forget that everything is a system.
Well, what do you think? What do you think happens to us as a society if we continue down this line, with children just looking at screens all day long and not interacting with other people, much less interacting with their environment, with nature?
There's a lot in that. One is the isolation that happens with kids when they are in a digital world. It can be a world of their own making, or worse, maybe a world, because I lived in my imagination growing up. But in the world that we live in today, the vulnerability of children being afraid that we're running out of resources, or being afraid and worried over the world burning up, things that may have no basis, or things that we should be better informed about, but the anxiety that children are living in this own little bubble, it's very worrying. And I think that's why the team that I work with, I'm so blessed to work with such gifted people. And we have felt a real sense of urgency to be able to break into that bubble with a magazine that comes every month, that explores where things come from and why we care, that will spark curiosity, not in preaching or not in all. We just want to spark curiosity and interest.
What was it that sparked your passion in this area? Did you witness something, or what was it that really made you decide to get involved?
I have, for 35 years, I have been doing work with communities and working with companies that produce our natural resources. And the public is sometimes disinterested, or if they've ever seen a movie, all the bad things happen in mining operations, right? All the mining guys are bad guys. Every Liam Neeson has the scene where the bad guys are in a quarry, there's barrels of things burning and people are shooting each other. That's often the way industry, especially in the natural resource world, is represented. And sometimes sometimes it's really demonized. Sometimes it's just happenstance that quarries and mining operations are good places to film. But
And if not, there's always the cave monster.
exactly. So anyway, that is professionally, I've sometimes been discouraged that people don't connect the dots, that people don't see that we need quarries and sand and gravel operations to produce the material we need for the roads we drive on, something that simple, let alone all of the wonderful conversation that is happening right now about mining more, making more, producing more. It is a wonderful thing to think about, this next generation being encouraged to be doers, not scrollers. But for that to happen, we need to not only engage and interest this next generation, but we have to engage the whole family. And when I grew up, Dr. Carson, as I said, I was the youngest of 4 daughters. And part of what made my parents change their life is that we had a tragedy in our family. And the second sister was killed in a horrible accident. And everybody in my family did the best they could. But it took about 3 years for my mom and dad to decide that they needed to do something completely different. And I'm looking now, being older, realizing they were saving their marriage, and they were probably very concerned about the 4-year-old daughter that they had still to raise. And the daughter who was younger, who's still 10 years older than I am, she was getting ready to go to college the year that we moved to this farm. And it was a very brave and bold thing for my parents to do. And that, I guess, a couple of things that are a part of that experience. One is that our family unit, at a time when it could have fallen apart, our family unit was fortified by reading. We read out loud all the time. And sometimes it wasn't fun reading out loud, like reading stories at bedtime. My mother insisted that I read the opinion page from the Wall Street Journal out loud to her every day after school, starting when I was 7. And so obviously I didn't understand all of the things that I was reading out loud, but the idea that it's important to read, it's important to expand your vocabulary so that not everything is just awesome, but that you find the right words for the right thing at the right time. That was really powerful and foundational to who I was able to become.
Well, when you stop and think about it, I mean, when you're reading, you're looking at words. So you learn how to spell. You can always tell a reader because they know how to spell. And then they have to take those words and put them together, so they learn grammar and syntax. And then they have to make those sentences into concepts, so they learn to use their imagination. They tend to be much more imaginative and creative than people who sit around and look at screens
just
all day.
that engagement. And the other thing from that experience that I've been thinking a lot about, and even in preparing to work with your organization, I've been thinking a lot about you, Dr. Carson, and I just recently learned that when I first heard you speak, you were the keynote speaker at a commencement at Wright State University, and you were speaking to a graduating class of doctors. And I was so blessed to be there. My nephew was one of the students that was graduating that day. And I just learned recently that you were in the middle of a lot of important work, and you were experiencing the miraculous recovery of one of your young patients. I just heard that story and realized,
That's right.
gosh, and not only that, to make that connection, but I felt so privileged that day, all those years ago, to listen to you to speaking to other young doctors to be. And I felt like I was, as I said, kind of blessed to be a mouse in the corner, listening to you give advice to this graduating class, encouraging them to be doctors that care about patients and that aren't just about making money or even being the right one with a diagnosis, but to really care about the patients. And that just touched my heart. Since then, I've been following you, excited about your run for presidency, excited about you being a part of the administration and all of the work that you're doing now. So I just wanted to share with you that this whole experience of getting to know your work better has really influenced what we're doing today. And one of the connections that I wanted to make was what you have talked about in terms of the plasticity of our brains.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that my own story of my parents who were in their 50s and made a huge change in their life, completely rewired probably their relationship and our family, and certainly were able to create an environment that I grew up in. The idea that parents today that are facing the challenges that we have with technology and their children being on devices all the time. I've talked to so many parents who say, I don't know what to do. My kids would just go crazy if they weren't on their phone all the time. I would want to encourage them to make a dramatic change for the good of their family, for the good of those children. You can make a difference starting today with limiting the cell phone, getting a smartphone maybe out of the hands of their children, getting books in their hands, getting good stories that inspire, that are about heroes. Kids need heroes. And I really think that Your Little Patriots program, in talking about the patriots that are our heroes and what we can do together, showing maybe the everyday patriots that are building this country, that mine, that build, whether they're building roads or manufacturing things. We have such a rich history of using our natural resources and doing it wisely and with such stewardship. I think those stories can
Absolutely.
encourage the next generation either to be doers and get outside and have a career that would be mostly outside and would be about building and making things, or frankly, even just the experience of sharing what you learn around the dinner table and having something to talk about that isn't politics or whatever the triggers are that go across people's feeds.
You know, I bet a lot of our listeners are wondering, with your affinity for nature and the outdoors, and the fact that you're a conservationist, you want things to stay for the next generation. What is your feeling about utilizing petroleum products?
I think fossil fuels are so important to our way of life. And I think that they really have been vilified. And I think that there is amazing technology that is making our use of fossil fuels smarter and cleaner, more responsible than in the past. But it is such an important part of our society is to be able to have the energy to make things and to do things. And so I have no doubt that we are going to continue to be smarter and smarter in our exploration, in our ability to get those resources so that we can easily use the energy that they produce. But I think that that also doesn't mean that we aren't going to continue to be innovative and find other sources of energy. But we have to use what we have. I believe that all of our natural resources are God-given, and they have to be treated like the gifts that they are.
I always say, use what you have to get what you want. They don't have to be adversarial. You can do both things at the same time as you make progress toward the ultimate goal. And, you know, unfortunately, we've allowed media and others to take little differences that people have and make them into big issues and make people think they're enemies. And we're not enemies at all. And we'll get to our goals much faster if we work together. But I want to ask you to tell us a little bit about Q4 Impact Mag and Boulder Magazine, two organizations that you lead. First of all, why do they have those names? And what's the
my
story?
husband and I have been in business together almost as long as we've been married. Bob is a third-generation mining engineer with a very proud, rich history in his family of being involved in the mining industry in Montana. And I have a degree in geology and communications. And so between the two of us, we have been in business with sort of a twofold approach. One has been his work, which has been highly technical, in a lot of cases, highly confidential about the mining world. He's an expert in a couple of different commodities. He's an expert in underground mining. Do you know in Chicago, there are 7 underground aggregate operations that provide all the crushed stone for all the road building in the Chicagoland area.
That's a real piece of information that no one knows.
I mean, there are a lot of surface quarries too, but those underground operations are just amazing operations that do their job every day with nobody even knows that they're there, but they're producing all of these important resources for the Chicago area.
If some people from Hollywood are listening to you, I'm sure they're cooking up a movie right now about it.
Although the latest Mission Impossible movie, they do have I don't want to give away the Mission Impossible movie, but there are some very important scenes that are all shot in an underground operation. So at any rate, that's a lot of Bob's work. My work has always been more on the communications side of things, helping connect the dots, whether it's community relations work, developing school programs. And I've done a lot of marketing and advertising work in and around these important industries. And the consulting company that we formed has a team of about 18 people that do either technical work or this creative work, but we all have a love of the industries related to natural resources, either the equipment that's required or the actual production of those resources. So about 2 years ago, we started to do some of our own strategic planning. And we decided that we had a particular set of gifts and talents ourselves, and that it would be a blessing if we could do something that used all of this, but would benefit the next generation. A lot of us are parents, seeing the sense of urgency, seeing that these are stories and people and companies and industries that their stories just are not being told. And so that's how Boulder Magazine and the idea of doing something that would be every month, that would be filled with fun and storytelling, as well as all of this great information that you wouldn't necessarily find anywhere else.
Now, the Boulder Magazine mission statement says, by sparking curiosity in the science of our natural world and the responsible use of our natural resources, we aim to reduce fears and inspire the next generation. What are some of those fears?
I think we already talked a little bit about the fears of running out of things and the fear that we shouldn't use our resources because somehow that's wrong. And I think that has been, that's just been a message that has really predominated any education around earth science. When we started to explore earth science and earth science education in schools, we determined that like almost 3/4 of that education is around climate change. And we at Boulder Magazine have decided we're not going to talk about climate change. There are so many other things to talk about, like what granite is used for, and the materials that we use every day, whether they're in our houses, whether they're in the roads that we're driving on, our use of resources, even the glass in the screen and the devices you and I are using is a silica product. Everything around us is made from something. And that's what we are trying to connect the dots about, because we think kids will think it's just fascinating.
And I think when kids start thinking that way, they become much more innovative. Start thinking about how they can do things rather than just be observers all the time. But how has your faith and prayer life influenced your passion to invest in the lives of others?
Everything starts with God and being grateful. And it is, my husband and I start out our day. This is the third, almost going on our fourth year of reading the Bible in a year as an exercise. And that's the way our day starts every day. And I really believe that the peace and the clarity that comes from knowing that you have a purpose and that you are loved it's everything. And in our world today, I don't think families get enough of that moment of calm, of being anchored to something bigger than you are, and that that sense of purpose comes out of that. And you know what you started out with, Dr. Carson, the anxiety and the worry and the depression that has, it's a contagion among young people. And only faith in God and having a purpose is going to help us get in front of that, I think.
Well, you must have encountered some pushback when you're trying to get kids off of the screens and into nature, or does everybody
I
accept
think
that?
I think things are changing, Dr. Carson. I think parents who love their children are starting to see that having such heavy supervision in their play, for example, is not a good thing. To allow children to be able to play, to whether it's climbing trees or being able to, even just being outside in the backyard without somebody choreographing the experience for them. Leaving kids alone of course, in a safe way, but letting kids be explorers of their own world. Let them climb a tree a little bit too high and figure out how to get down on their own. Those sorts of experiences for children are so important that I think as this is all playing out, we're seeing such high rates of depression and anxiety among kids, and people are weighing in with the science behind it. I think parents are going to have to do the bold thing themselves and take away those devices, have an uncomfortable 2 weeks while new patterns and new habits are established, and get great books in front of your kids. Get those great stories like the stories that you are doing with the Little Patriots program. Get those stories ignite the imagination. And I think it is going to be uncomfortable to set those new patterns. And we just have to be encouraging to those parents who are feeling like, and when you're a parent and you realize the power of saying no to a toddler, and that sometimes all that toddler needs to hear is no with calmness and authority, and they move on to something else. And I think we forget that when kids are 10 or 11 or 12, parents need to be able to be calm and strong and say, no, this is going to be best for our family. Let's get a book out and read it aloud as a family.
Amen. Well, you're talking a lot of common sense here, but we're excited about the collaboration of Boulder and Little Patriots. What are some of your ideals about Mount Rushmore and how we can incorporate that into the magazine?
I couldn't be more excited about what we're doing together, because teaching civics and history go hand in hand with how our country was built and where things came from. So when we talked about how can we work together, Mount Rushmore was just this perfect tie-in, because the monument of Mount Rushmore honoring what actually these four men who were our presidents, actually all of them have so much in common that was fun to discover. They all were surveyors. In fact, Jefferson and Washington and Lincoln, they were professional surveyors. And Teddy Roosevelt, at the end of his life, he was surveying the northern Amazon. So anyway, we're going to touch a little bit about that in addition to sharing all of the other wonderful things about these men and what they did for their country. But we dug into the actual making of Mount Rushmore. You know, they first tried to do it on Stone Mountain outside of Atlanta, and it didn't work. And so they found this beautiful big granite cliff in South Dakota, and they got the Homestake miners. The Homestake gold mine was not too far away, and these men all knew how to use drills and how to use dynamite. And 80% of the monument was built by miners. So we'll be sharing some of those stories in the actual making of Mount Rushmore that now today is a beautiful monument to those four patriots.
It really is quite phenomenal. Well, how can people find Boulder Magazine and sign up?
Well, there's two things about Boulder Magazine. We'd love to have you subscribe to Boulder, and you will get 80 pages. There's no advertising in Boulder Magazine. It's just 80 pages every month of great stuff about the outdoors and stories and interesting information. And to go to bouldermagazine.com, and Boulder is spelled Bolder, magazine.com. But the other thing is that we have these wonderful companies that are our partners that have stepped alongside us, Dr. Carson, and they are buying the magazine and then giving it to schools or giving it to children's hospitals. So even just over this weekend, the Akron Children's Hospital reached out to me asking to get the magazine for their patients. And I reached out to a company that has said, boy, we'd love to help, but we don't know where, we don't know how. And they are now going to be providing the magazine for Akron Children's Hospital because we think that's a really wonderful connection. So if you're interested in being, if you're a company and you think this is a good idea and you want to help, it's go to partners, that's plural, partners.bouldermagazine.com. We'd love to have, this has been a labor of love, and we're so proud of all of the content that we've created. I'm looking at, this is our latest issue about frogs versus toads, but we also describe like what the water table is all about and what it would be like to be an underground or a underwater welder. So we've got, all of our magazines are just filled with things. We would love to have people subscribe. We'd love people to help us spread the word about reading and how wonderful our natural resources are.
It's so important, the work that you're doing. And, you know, I think back to my childhood and my turnaround. It started with reading a book about a beaver. And then I started reading about all other kinds of animals and then rocks and trees. And I became a real fan of the outdoors and am so even today. And we're so fortunate in this country. We have some of the most beautiful parks. And you go to a place like Zion National Park and you see the scenery. But you don't even have to do that. You can find it in virtually every state. We have parks and set-asides that our government has felt was necessary to preserve for the people because they realize the exact things that you're talking about. It's just that we don't talk about them anymore, and we need to. So thank you for doing that. Thank you for being with us today, and may God bless your ministry.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Carson. God bless you.
Well, welcome back. That was wonderful speaking with Bronwyn Weaver about the wonders of nature, all the things that God has given us, and appreciating those things, getting our children to appreciate those things. and to cultivate that spark of curiosity that exists naturally in them, to explore their environments, and to really learn about how things work and what impact they can have in their sphere of influence. And the whole world of reading, how it really opens up a whole new chapter in the lives of children rather than just sitting around looking at a screen all day long, looking at what other things people have imagined, but not really sparking your own imagination. And we have our own reading challenge this summer. If you have little patriots in your house, I encourage you to join our Patriot Pages Summer Reading Challenge. Read books, write a short report about it, just like my mother used to have us do. And if your child completes the challenge, they'll receive a small gift from Little Patriots. You can learn more about the challenge at littlepatriotslearning.com. And that's it for this week. Make sure you always watch. Tell everybody else about us. We need to spread common sense wherever you get your podcast. And remember the cornerstones: faith, liberty, community, and life. See you next week.